right, we're live at the Capitol tonight, and I'm joined with my guest, Representative Erin Murphy, District 54B.
64A.
What am I thinking? Did I just mention John Lesch's district?
I know 54 is like Cottage Grove, I think.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, sorry.
That's okay.
I don't know where my head was at there. But you're here, and it's good to see you, and I don't get to interact with you as much anymore that I'm not on the floor
That's right.
as often, but I know you're busy. So let's maybe tell viewers a little bit about what the DFL priorities might be for this session. I know we're very early, but this is a short session, right? And a budget year.
It is. It is a budget year, and we've been in for about a week, right? So I think we're all in our committees. Today was a budget forecast day, so we learned through that there is just a very, very modest surplus. Which I think is, the good news of that is that the budget continues to be stable. But if we listen carefully to the commissioner, he's suggesting that in the out years there may be some budget instability, and we've got to pay attention to that. So, I think this session we will take up, I know the Republicans are going to want to take up tax conformity and try and figure out what they should do with the federal tax bill. That really is a giveaway to the very wealthy people across this country. And we're going to have to work our way through that. For me and for my colleagues, of course, we're going to be focusing on the things that we are hearing from Minnesotans. That is, healthcare that people can count on.
Sure.
They're looking for student debt relief, absolutely. For us to fulfill commitments that we have made in infrastructure and bonding and broadband. And I think Minnesotans are looking for work that is about us and about our future. And my colleagues here in the Minnesota House are going to focus on those things.
I see. Well, Republicans came out today and said, well, look at the DFL claimed gloom and doom, tax cuts work, blah, blah, blah. But not blah, blah, blah. But I mean, it was a long, I didn't read the whole thing.
That was
I just
an ellipse. It's a verbal ellipse.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. You saved me there. Feel bad. But the long and the short of it was, that they'd said, well, Democrats had predicted a budget gloom and doom, and here it's turned out to be a surplus, and look what tax cuts do. How did you have any response to that, or did you read it?
I think that their response was a pretty typical response, and I've been through lots of budget forecasts now, so,
Sure.
We all look at that through our own lens, and I do think it's important for us to pay attention to what's in that document, what's in that forecast. We had a pretty significant surplus going into the budget cycle last year, $1.3 billion, I think, of a surplus. And the early part of my tenure in the Minnesota House was all about budget deficits that were in part because of a no new tax pledge of Governor Pawlenty. And he was pretty effective at driving the budget into the ground here in the state of Minnesota and really putting the brakes on Minnesota's strong economy. So, I remain very proud of the work that we did in 2013 when we balanced the budget again. I mean, we did raise some taxes, but out of that has come a number of years of stable budget, which is a tool, a foundation really that we can use to plan for our future. And we had a pretty significant surplus coming into this biennium. It's much smaller now, and that's because of the tax cuts that got signed into law here in Minnesota. And the largesse of the tax cuts that were passed in Congress are going to continue to put pressure on Minnesotans on their family budgets. And we'll see. But I expect that we're going to have some trouble here with our state budget as well.
What specifics, like examples of those pressures, do you think, how will they manifest for like the everyday person?
What I hear the most about is health care. And we know embedded in that federal tax bill were cuts to medical assistance. But across the spectrum, if you will, the continuum of the ways that people get access to care, whether it is in a program like medical assistance or Medicare or employer-based coverage, Minnesotans are talking about the cost of drugs, the cost of their deductibles, surprise bills, the cost of their premiums. I was down in Cannon Falls and spent some time on a farm visiting and learning a little bit about their operation. And when I talked about what was most difficult about their day-to-day lives, the gentleman that we were combining together said, it's the cost of my health care. And after he got his new rates, he let me know, he sent me an email and let me know that his new rates were going to be totaled about $27,000 a year out of pocket for his family, which is really difficult to afford.
Yeah, sure.
So, across the state, while we have made huge strides in terms of coverage, and we have a pretty low rate of uninsured here in the state of Minnesota, though we've seen an uptick now in the uninsured rate, the costs for people are really significant, and that is something that I am paying a lot of attention to. I've got ideas about that, but so do my colleagues in the House. And it's just one good example, I think, of the pocketbook problems that people are having here in the state.
Interesting. So when Trump did make those changes, or those changes are being, I guess, rolled out now, what, with respect to like the health insurance mandate, the making it, that was difficult for families too. Do you at least appreciate that part of it as being eliminated, or how do you feel that's going to reverberate?
So essentially they stripped away the penalty.
Right. It forced people to buy it. And
Right.
Sometimes couldn't afford. A lot of people complained about it.
So, I've never been a giant fan of the individual mandate, except for what it creates, which is everybody's in. And there's an important economic reason for wanting everybody in the system.
Shared costs.
Right. And I think that when everybody's in, we all have a real stake in the matter in a different way. And I think it's helped Minnesotans and Americans really understand some of the weaknesses of the current ways that we finance and deliver care. So stripping away that penalty, I think, is going to create more instability for people and more instability in some of the segmented markets that are created by the insurance industry. So that could mean higher rates for people or less options down the line, and that's not what people are looking for. They're looking for, something that they can count on. So it's a problem.
Was there a better way to do it then, apart from, remove the mandate but make it apart from single payer, right? Yeah. Which is something we've talked about in the past.
Yeah, so I think the middle ground, and what the passage of the Affordable Care Act really did represent, was expanding coverage on the current model of private and public coverage melded together. And those two things, can fit together, but they're not fitting together very well because the market is behaving in a way that is different than, in the 25 years that I've been working in healthcare and health policy here in the state of Minnesota. So I think we're going to continue to see problems. People are going to keep sharing their experiences of costs and the lack of security around healthcare as a result of that.
Right. Well, I think you made a point earlier, and it's fair to go back and visit a little history here at the state capitol. You and I basically came up here around the same time. It's been almost a decade now we've been here. And one of the things that was first out of the gate was Governor Pawlenty then had cut the budget, and it was clear that money was going to have to come from somewhere. And then I remember the fight over GMAC came along. And you were on the spearhead of trying to change that because there were going to be deep cuts and people were actually, in danger of dying if they didn't get coverage. Is it worth talking about the comparison in terms of what the president's done at the, in his administration to what the governor did when he was here then, Governor Pawlenty?
Well, I remember when Governor Pawlenty line item vetoed the funding for general assistance medical care, effectively canceling coverage for the very poorest, as his commissioner at the time said, the sickest and the poorest Minnesotans. They made less than $8,000 a year.
Right.
Most of them pretty chronically ill. So
because they were up here talking to you. And
they were.
Yeah, right.
I learned so much from that experience, and especially now with Tim Pawlenty's name being bantered about. I'm thinking through and revisiting that experience. Because at the end of the day, at the end of that session, we were able to secure coverage again for people, and funding that became the funding for the expansion of medical assistance here in the state of Minnesota. Over Governor, Minnesotans were very clear, right? And it was one of the first real beacons for me about who we are from a sense of politics. I think a lot of people thought no one is going to really care enough to join this fight to save GAMC, but Minnesotans said, heck yeah. Minnesotans who are very sick should get care, which, to this day makes me smile and is a reflection of our values. And in the last year, when I have spent so much of my time with the people of Minnesota, I can just happily share with you that that hopefulness and practicalness of us exists in the very best way.
Yeah. Conservative or Democrat, I mean, people just, Minnesotans don't tolerate, poor education, stepping on the poor, things like that, core values.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Good. It's good that you feel good about that, because I have not toured the state as you have, but I have visited a lot of small towns in Minnesota, and people always seem really nice. So that's good, and I think it reflects in the good politics we have here. So moving on to something that's been very in the front of the news media lately, and you've probably been asked about this, and I would like you to share your thoughts about like how can we as a state or state legislature prevent gun violence, or what's being done, what are some of the bills up here, and how do you respond to the GOP's sort of characterization that this is a slippery slope, we should arm teachers, put them in things like that.
Well, I'll begin.
It's a lot.
Yeah,
sorry,
no, that's okay.
There's a lot around
that there is even a hint of credibility around the idea that we could solve for what happened in Parkland, Florida, by making sure that teachers were armed is ridiculous from my perspective, just plain ridiculous. And it is, for me, a very clear sign that we have abandoned the common sense approach that has been, I think, the hallmark of policymaking here in the state of Minnesota. So long before I was elected, I worked on this issue of gun violence prevention. I came to it as a nurse. I think it's still important to us. I have been encouraged by the organizing that's been happening by groups here in the state of Minnesota, like Moms Demand Action and Protect Minnesota. And I think that organizing is really critical because a lot of Minnesotans express support for things like criminal background checks, for the temporary orders of protection if somebody's a danger to themselves or others. There's a lot of support for the bill that I've introduced that would allow the Department of Health to, again, collect data around...
House File 2891.
Yep, so there's a lot of support for those ideas. But, I learned in the very most upfront way when I was the majority leader that the gun lobby has a lot of power to stop things. And they have a playbook that's very familiar to me and I think really familiar to Minnesotans, and we're starting to hear some of their favorite hits, if you will, about ways to push policymakers away from making progress. And the thing that gives me hope, and I've heard this over and over again, is the change in Americans, and especially driven by young people who have said that's enough.
Left, right, and center.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right.
And I want us together to find our path forward on common sense solutions that will reduce gun violence. And in Minnesota, we have a real issue with suicide by gun, and we should be able to have a conversation, have a policy debate about that, and make some progress for the people of Minnesota. But we can't do that if the gun lobby or parts of the gun lobby are hanging out at the table, because I've seen over and over again their very, very clear aptitude to just stop things. And that's unfortunate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, what about, let me get back to that in a second, but what about assault weapon ban? The AR-15, which I fired in the military when I was in, was basically an M16 with made into a semi-automatic weapon. Where are you on that in particular?
So I will be introducing legislation in addition to the bill you just named. That will include background checks, and it will include a ban on assault weapons. They are a tool of war. I will tell you, I have a brother-in-law who has in the past tried to hunt with a weapon like that, and he's chosen not to anymore just because it's heavy and impractical. That's his choice. But I don't think we need to sell them here in the state of Minnesota, and there's a lot of support for the idea that we should not sell them here in the state of Minnesota, that they should be banned. Like my brother-in-law, I know that there are people in Minnesota that are following the law, they're abiding by the law. They would not use that weapon to harm people, but it is intended to harm people, and semi-automatic assault-style weapons have been used in many of the mass shootings across the country in the last number of years, which I think should be a clear signal to us that it has become the weapon of choice and it's meant to hurt people, and we should do something about that.
Well, that's going to elicit some questions probably from the Facebook people. If you do have questions for Representative Murphy regarding, gun violence or a ban on an assault weapon or anything like that, please feel free to step in, and our producer, Katie, you can interrupt us if you need to. Let me ask you about, so the GOP is, they before Parkland, there were bills on the table, some of them led by people like Tony Cornish, who's no longer here, but the sort of the castle doctrine type, stand your ground bills and things like that. What do you make of the chances of any of that moving forward? Because I talked to some Republicans here, and Abler last week said there's no chance. What are your thoughts about that?
I hope that's right. I hope that the change that I'm hearing from people is real and sustained over time.
Yeah. Are you hearing that from your Republican colleagues? That
I haven't heard as much from my Republican colleagues.
in the House?
No, I haven't, and I'm not on the Public Safety Committee, and I know they're going to take up a couple of those bills tomorrow.
In committee?
Yeah, in committee. Dave Pinto's the author of both of those pieces of legislation. I think, when we are elected to represent the interests of people, we got to listen to them. And Minnesotans have for a very long time been saying we support background checks, we support common sense, gun violence prevention, even, people like my husband Joe, who loves to hunt, people who embrace the culture of hunting and sport. There is a lot of support for our ability to, with respect to the Second Amendment, still make progress and protect people's safety. And when I think about what happened in Parkland or in Las Vegas, at the Pulse, at Virginia Tech, at Sandy Hook, right? It's just, it is long past due for us to push aside the NRA. They have too much power. And to, with Minnesotans in mind, make some decisions that protect our interests and our kids, especially in our kids.
Thank you. And you spoke to this a little bit earlier, but the idea that more armed people, which seems to be the general main thrust of the argument against, quote unquote gun control. I guess you could say gun violence is a euphemism that, but it existed, I think, before like the gun control euphemism. But okay, so gun control in general. The main push seems to be arm more people and we'll see less gun violence, because then everybody will be afraid to, shoot somebody else, or there'll be somebody there to stop the shooting if it does occur. You spoke to it a minute ago about arming teachers, but what about the general idea that more guns would promote a safer community?
Well, I guess I would want somebody else to make that argument. It doesn't hold water for me. It's not a logical argument. But let's talk again about teachers. Sure. Let's talk about teachers. Our current president had suggested if, those teachers really love the kids in their classroom, that they'll defend them. Our teachers are there to teach. Our kids are in school to learn. It should be a safe and open environment. And the more that we consider it an unsafe place, and therefore we need people that are armed and more secured in our schools, the less it is a facility where people can learn freely, where kids can be kids, and that's where we need to go. I don't buy the argument at all that if by arming more people, we're going to be safer. And I think our country is awash in guns. They're I understand, pretty readily available. I don't think that's making us safer. Yeah.
Thank you. And so, any questions regarding that? Okay, anything else? Okay, we're good.
We have some viewers.
No, I mean some questions, or if you get questions, just let us know. All right, so you've done almost every job up here at the Capitol as far as legislatively. You've been the leader, and you've done, and this year you're not a minority. Is that minority leader? Is that partly because you're running for office? Or
yeah,
is it too much time consuming?
No, it's about commitment for me, and I have loved representing the people here in the House. It's been my big honor. And I ran to be an assistant leader and the majority leader, and I did that, for many reasons, but it was in part because I wanted to make sure I was doing the work both on the campaign side of our politics, because it's, I always like to confess this to people, I love politics.
Sure.
And making sure that we're recruiting good candidates, making sure that people are getting elected, spending my time on the ground, on the doors, talking with Minnesotans has been a real joy for me, and Minnesotans have been kind and they have been awesome teachers for me. But when I made the decision to run for governor, I knew that it would be important to focus on that and not encumber the caucus, right? It wouldn't be right for me to have that job and sort of take advantage of that job in pursuit of another one. And so I didn't run for a leadership position because I knew I wanted to do this instead.
Okay. Well, let's talk about your gubernatorial aspirations for a moment, if we can. So you recently sat down on the sofa. I watched the Almanac program when you were with the other candidates, and seems like you've got a lot in common with some of the candidates there. Obviously, you share a party, but how do you feel about how things came out, not just in that sit down, but in general through the caucus system or your primary? What is it? It's slipping my mind all of a sudden. You guys all get together and decide straw
Caucuses?
poll.
Yeah, right.
Caucuses, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm right. I'm just caucus and caucus mix me up. How do you feel about the results of that?
We were real happy. Our goal was to be in the top 3, and we got there.
Okay.
And I was a little surprised to hear from people after the fact that they didn't expect that I could do it. And I was real underestimated in my first race, and I think that's probably true in this race as well.
Okay.
But I grew up in a working family, and hard work has always been the way that my family achieved what they achieved, right? My parents have built a really good life. My dad built cars for a living. My mom cleaned houses for a living. I worked as a waitress and as a nursing aide, and I did some cleaning too. Work was just a part of who we were growing up, and it has been the thing I think that has helped me be successful. And I won't stop working, and I don't think anyone will outwork me in this race. So we were very happy. And the race is pretty wide open as we head into the conventions, and there are people that have shown up as delegates who haven't participated in the process before, who are saying, I'm here because I didn't like what happened in the last election, and
Sure.
I'm going to participate now. And I will say for the last year, right, I have seen in all sorts of ways, in book clubs and indivisible groups and meetups and huddles, there are people in Minnesota all over the place stepping into our politics in a real powerful way because they are interested in bringing their voice to bear on our future.
You don't participate, you don't get a voice in politics, and that's important because it affects your life so directly. What about the DFL endorsement? So you'll go to convention, they'll endorse a candidate. Will you abide by the DFL endorsement?
Yeah, and I included that in the very first announcement that we made when we filed the paperwork. It's important to me, that endorsement. It's important infrastructure for me. But in Minnesota, we are a very grassroots politics state. And I think if someone chooses to go to the primary because they can raise a lot of money, they sort of bypass the let's talk to each other in the politics part of the race. And for me, if we don't put ourselves back into our politics again and engage together, especially around the things that challenge us, we won't be able to make progress on them.
So it'll come to the convention, it'll come down to an endorsement, and they'll, at the convention, once that's done, you'll throw your support behind yourself or whoever, you'll be asking them to throw their support behind you, or you'll throw your support behind them.
So after the caucus, before the caucus, when Attorney General Swanson announced that she wasn't going to run, we did issue a statement asking everyone else in the race to agree to abide by the endorsement, because I think it's important for us.
Yeah.
I am running to earn that endorsement, and we're on a path to earn that endorsement, and I think I will get that endorsement, and it will be a powerful tool to win that general election.
And have they all said they will?
No, they have not all said they will.
Okay. Yeah, I suppose I can look it up, but do you want to name names? They're in your party. So
It's okay.
I don't want to put you on the spot.
You know, the only person who has not agreed to abide is Congressman Walz.
Yeah, well, okay. Which some people have labeled a contender in the race, obviously. What do you make about, well, just talking about gubernatorial politics, you reminded me of, remember the convention where Tom Rukavina gave the greatest speech I've ever heard from a short guy from the Iron Range? He'd appreciate that if he's watching. I put labor in the DFL. Remember the speech? It was a great
It was an
speech.
awesome speech.
And it was fun to listen to, but didn't end up ultimately getting the endorsement of the. But he fell in line with the party, I think, at that point. But do you remember that day? Because I think you spoke at the convention, didn't you?
No, I don't think I spoke at that convention.
Okay.
But
I
I do
think
remember
that
that day.
there.
Yeah, I do remember that day. It was a long day.
Because we had a Minneapolis mayor in the middle of all of it, too.
There were a lot of candidates.
Yeah,
That's right. Yep.
And you expect, you said you expect to win the endorsement. What gives you that confidence?
The work that we're doing in this campaign, the work that we did all through 2017 to organize and to get ready.
Sure.
So we did more than 100 house parties all over the state of Minnesota. We were in not every, but almost every county in the state. But you know, I think the campaign is built upon the work that I've done for a decade, which has taken me into people's homes, in their businesses, in our communities all over the state. And when I, spend my time talking with people, there is a sense for people all over the state that our economy is doing well, and we're doing very well on lots and lots of measures here in the state of Minnesota. But my part of the community, my experience, my family is feeling left behind. There's that real sense that people are being passed over, and it could be a rural community, or could be a community that's been seeking, something in a bonding bill, but hasn't had it addressed because we're not bonding very often. There's a sense that
We cut LGA up here.
we've done a lot of things to the state's budget.
Yeah.
The act of showing up over so many years, I think, has been a powerful proof point to the people of Minnesota that I care about them, that I'm going to fight for them, that I'm curious and have spent my time getting to know them and getting to know their communities. And as I said earlier, they've been my very best teachers, and I think if a part of Minnesota is falling behind, then Minnesota's falling behind, and
Sure.
When I get elected the governor, I'm going to fight for all of us.
Okay. Gubernatorial politics, last couple questions, and then we'll wrap up. But you mentioned Pawlenty earlier. His name has come up. He's kind of doing some things to make it seem like he might jump back in the race. How gratifying would it be to you to stand across the podium from him in terms of some of the battles you guys had up here? Maybe not so directly, but you were definitely on opposite ends of some of the battles during his governorship here.
Yeah, I feel exquisitely prepared to do that, having the experience that I have here in the Minnesota House, and especially on GAMC. I'm the only person on the DFL side of this race that can say, that I have taken him on and prevailed. And I think that's important. I'm also a pretty good contrast to the Tim Pawlenty of Washington, D.C. So I look forward to it. I've had the good fortune of understanding how he does his work. And, I know what he did to the state of Minnesota, and I'm running to build a future for the people of Minnesota and not use the people of Minnesota as a stepping stone to something else. Yeah. And I think there's a real sharp contrast between he and I there that will be effective in the general election.
Well, I know you're tough, but I wonder about when he tries to disarm you with his folksy hockey talk like Emery used to do all the time to us.
I have my own version of folksy talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm susceptible to it. It's Emery says a self-deprecating hockey story, and I just melt. I do.
Okay, well that's you and not me.
Yeah, you won't.
I will say this, that Minnesotans, I think they are fatigued with the kind of politics that is so it's so battled. And they, and I keep saying this over and over and over again, I have experienced the most lovely 2017 because I've spent my time talking with Minnesotans, not about what I don't like about Donald Trump, not about what I don't like about the Republicans, but about our communities, about solutions to the problems that we face, about how we build a future. And I think Minnesotans appreciate that, along with space to get to know each other. So I think there is absolute room for the differences between myself, my DFL candidates, the differences between myself and whoever is the Republican nominee. But I'm in this race to build Minnesota's future. And Minnesotans are very good at finding solutions. And I think if we pay attention to what they're doing, the solutions for some of the hardest problems we face are right there before our very eyes. And that's where I'm going to spend my time, talking about that and what we can do together.
Well, sounds good, Representative Murphy. You cut off my next series of questions by saying you don't want to talk about Trump, but all right. I was going to go there, but national politics is pretty interesting right now, obviously, and there's a lot going on. And I was asking Senator Abler last week about his thoughts about the administration and stuff, and he shared a little bit of his thoughts, but I think it's sort of bordering on reality TV if it hasn't passed that now. And I just wanted to get if you've heard, you've been all over the state. What are people saying? I mean, obviously they're fed up, I know, somewhat with a two-party system. That frustrates people. But they don't really have a place to turn. Those people, that 70% in the middle that are just, want common sense stuff. You don't see that at the national level right now, I mean, in general. What are you hearing?
So there's sort of a paradox, I think, about us as people. So we are, we absolutely organize ourselves around sort of political ideology, for sure, right? And we see that. And
Polarizing. Right?
It can be quite polarizing. There are people that participate in politics to polarize people because you can get short-term gain out of that. It's not a way to build our future, but you get some short-term gain.
You get power too. You can, if you end up in Washington, or something like that.
But so there's that phenomenon, but there's also the phenomenon that I hear that we just want some common sense progress, and I'm a progressive. Anybody who knows my record would say, she's a progressive for sure. But I also have a record of accomplishment, and a pretty serious record of accomplishment here at the state capitol. And that I always tie back to my experience as a nurse. When you're taking care of a patient, you don't get to walk away from a tough situation. You have to find a path forward with that person. You have to do your very best on their behalf. You have to create options. And we don't do enough of that in our policymaking here anymore. We walk away from what are challenges because they're politically hard instead of sticking with it and finding a path forward. And I want, as the state's governor, to do that again, to focus on the things that challenge us, to find solutions. They exist already, and to bring Minnesotans' voice to bear so we can actually make that kind of progress. And that's not a left-right thing. That is a let's get some stuff done thing.
Yeah. Well, I don't know whether that was a pivot or what it was, but we didn't get to national politics. But that's okay. But let me ask you this. So every time we sit down together at the end of our thing, I always try to ask you, what's one nice thing you have to say about somebody on the other side of the aisle, or a colleague you're working with in the GOP? And always over the years, you've always been able to find somebody and say something nice about them. What do you see this year? What colleagues are you able to work with well? Who's reaching across the aisles? Who's the Jim Abler of the House right now? Or, one of those people that are able to, that you think would take like a principled stand versus what the caucus tells them to do.
So one of the people that I have been doing some work with in the last couple of years is Tony Albright in the House. He and I have been doing some work together on regenerative medicine. It's an issue that I took up in. So, I've done some work with Jacob Tolar at the University of Minnesota, and he and I worked together on a proposal that would secure some funding to do regenerative medicine, and we actually got it passed into law the second year of my tenure as a majority leader. And there's a partnership that exists between the University of Minnesota and Mayo, in addition to funding that is going into sort of science-based education that would feed into the preparation for people that want to go into science and regenerative medicine. And Tony was really interested in that, and so he became sort of the lead on the behalf of the Republicans and the House caucus on that issue, and we've continued to work together on that issue. So I think that, the combativeness of our politics, which often gets expressed in committees.
Especially at the end of this session, when it's an election year, there'll be a lot of speeches.
And, in our floor debates, often masks the actual relationships that exist among us. And while we have real disagreements and, we come to loggerheads on issues that divide us, the relationships there do exist. I always talk about my friendship with Matt Dean.
Yeah.
That, he has been my friend ever since we worked on GAMC together. I'm sort of sad that he's out of the race. I was looking forward to the next heat of the race with him in it, but he decided that he was going to suspend his campaign. Yes. I will also say that about Paul Thiessen and Chris Coleman, who brought their smarts and good humor to the governor's race, and I miss them both as friends and colleagues.
Yeah. Well, I'm always in awe of the way that the people that came before us designed this Capitol building and the way they were. So people might not know this at home, but when you're on the House floor, this didn't happen until the 70s, but you're divided now. So there's Democrats on one side and Republicans on the other side. But it wasn't always that way. Prior to the 70s, it was just kind of a conservative liberal designation, and kind of people sat where they were assigned, and you could be right next to a Republican. But our forefathers, or the people who built foremothers, who built the place, had the thought to put a break room like in the back, a really, really nice break room. It's not like where I get a vending machine and some benches. It's a really, really nice place. And Katie's been in there, but you guys have to go back after you've been yelling at each other for 45 minutes and sit down and eat together and talk to each other together. And you're sort of forced into a space where even if you just passionately hate what that other person said, somehow you have to reconcile it. And I think that's a cool thing.
It is. And
probably some days you're like, damn it, I wish there was a divider. But,
I think there are a lot of people that are here who express a lot of emotion and feel a lot of emotion, me included, because I care deeply about what I'm doing and I care deeply about the people of Minnesota.
And that transcends political ideology.
It does. It does. So, for many of us, the disagreements that we have are rooted in values, right? And there are common values that bind us together. My friend and colleague, Representative Frank Hornstein, is probably the very best at modeling the behavior that you're describing, where he can debate and debate vigorously with a colleague, disagree openly, and then sit down together and break bread. He's really good at that. And
who from the Republican side do you think is good like that? I mean, I know Biskins and you used to get along. He'd come over.
Well, he would come over and talk to me, but mostly because he wanted my chair, because he wanted to talk to Frank.
Oh, I gotcha.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
But who would you say today comes over and chats with you?
There are a variety of people. Greg Davids is good at this. He is good at engaging in a pretty spirited debate, and then to step aside and say, how's your family doing?
Yeah.
In a way that is meaningful.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, you got to miss Tom Rukavina, because I mean, one day I was on the House floor and Representative Laura Broad, who's not with the legislature, she was giving a very passionate, very emotional speech about something. She was in her orange suit. Remember, she would do the bright. It was like autumn time or what? I don't remember what it was exactly, but she was giving a really passionate speech, and then she finished the speech, and Rukavina just rose to speak and and he just cracked a joke, and everybody just burst, and the whole place just erupted in laughter. And you got to miss that too, because sometimes it didn't matter. He'd just make it fun.
Yeah, he has a very sharp wit and excellent timing. He really has impeccable timing.
I always thought he should have been a Hollywood writer or something. Write for Jon Stewart or something.
Yes. And he gives a great speech.
One of the best speeches I've ever heard.
Well, that speech there was good, but he's given some tremendous speeches on the floor as well. And again, his fight is rooted in what he believes in and for people. And I will always adore that about him. And one night, it was midnight, it was probably close to midnight, we were debating on the floor, and there was a big thunderstorm. And, parts of the Capitol Dome are glass, right? So it was lightning and thundering, and you could see the lightning, and he was making references to his mother, it was very funny. Anyhow, he's very talented.
Yeah, he's great. Well, we miss him up here. Forget political ideology. He was just a great comedian too. So I miss that part of it. But really appreciate you sitting down with us, Representative Murphy, to go over some of these things and the priorities. Apart from your governor stuff, what do you? You have no time for family now, right? You're touring the state. Your husband. When does he get to see you? When do they get to get mom back?
So I think I'll see both my daughters this weekend. I think they're going to both be back home. Neither of them are living in Minnesota right now. Bridget just finished grad school, and Anna's practicing nursing in Indiana. Her husband is in grad school there, so I think they'll both be home. I see Joe pretty much every day, and I mentioned this earlier. He loves to hunt and he loves to fish, and our kids are grown up, so he's spending a lot of time out in the great outdoors doing the thing that he loves, and that's good. It's a really good thing for him.
Yeah. You're saying that like my wife says it when I have to go do my hobby. Like, yeah, it's okay, live close and visit often.
I didn't say that, but
no. But you okay? Like Wellstone, he had the big green bus. What do you want to get going here if you get the endorsement? You gonna get some kind of like the Oscar Mayer deal or something? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be that. Whatever gets us, onto the ground and talking with Minnesotans.
Okay.
Yep.
So, but it just, not the regular stuff, right? You got to get like a, I don't know, microbus or something. I don't know, something really hippie like, It's cool.
I'll keep you posted. How about that?
It might not play in Anoka, but whatever, it'll be good in the metro. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Representative Murphy. It's good to talk to you tonight.
It's great to talk with you too. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, you bet. All right. Well, that's it tonight from the Capitol, unless you have any. Okay, good. When there's no questions right now, but you must have explained yourself really well.
How about that?
Yeah, good. All right. This is Marty Owings live at the Capitol. So long for now, everybody. We'll see you next week.